I never made more, but I can get you one printed. Okay. The mic is hot. The bell probably has rung, so let's jump into the book of Revelation, chapters 4 and 5 tonight. Oh, looks like I need to get a new binder. It's too small to hold all these papers. Thanks. Okay, get my clicker here. One review question, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the details of it. But the three dangers that were facing the Christians in Roman Asia at the time that the Revelation was penned. The first one, persecution. Now let's talk a little bit more about that, just a second here. Why? Why were the Christians being persecuted? What was the source of that persecution? What do you remember from both our intro classes as well as what Nathan did on Sunday, which, by the way, was very, very well done, and he's not even here at the moment, but appreciate his work greatly, and I've told him so, and we'll tell him so again. But why were the Christians persecuted? Being persecuted. Okay, Roman persecution, and why? Why were the Romans persecuting the Christians? Yes, thank you, Fidencio. Yeah, in the Roman world, it's no king but Caesar, right? It's kind of the basic mentality. For the Christian, it's no king but Christ, right? And in particular, there was kind of this practice that had grown up around the time that the Revelation was written, where Romans were expected to do what in terms of the emperor? Worship, right? Offer an offering of worship, and the Christians refused to do that. Okay, and that drew the ire of the Romans. That's not actually the only source of persecution, though. What else have we seen? And Nathan pointed this out on Sunday. Yeah, there's also a Jewish persecution. And really, that whole dynamic, you should read the book of Acts. And the book of Acts, even in other places, the same sort of thing is playing out, where the Jews had their reasons, which are maybe more obvious to us, because we understand the dynamic of claiming Jesus is the Messiah, and the Jews didn't accept Jesus as the Messiah. But then sometimes the Jews would even hand over the Christians or work hand in hand with the Roman government to get these Christians persecuted. So they were taking heat, so to speak, from both sides. The Christians were. Persecution was a real part of their reality. At least most of the Christians. You read through some of the letters, and maybe it wasn't so bad in some places. Although I think y'all pointed out rightly that there's maybe a reason why they weren't being persecuted. And that's because they had done the next thing. But before that, Brian, you have a question?
This is, if the writing's somewhere around 90 AD, the dispersion out of the destruction of Jerusalem has already taken place. But the Jews were not persecuted by the Romans, that I can tell. It was the Christians that was the focus of the Romans' attention.
That's right. Yeah, and Nathan mentioned that, some of that on Sunday, that there was kind of this long-standing tolerance that the Romans had for the Jews and did not force them to participate in the Roman worship. And for a while, as Nathan said, the Christians were just seen as another group of Jews, and they kind of received the same tolerance from the Romans the Jews did. But once it became apparent that they were two separate groups, the Jews kind of remained tolerated, although their city and temple was completely destroyed because they angered the Romans. But the Christians seemed to draw more of that direct persecution in terms of not worshiping the emperor. Right? Okay, the second danger. So persecution is one danger. The second danger? Well, they're not really in order for any real reason except for the way I did them, but compromise is the second one. And what sorts of compromises do you remember from the letters where the Christians pressured into? They pressured, deceived. Okay, the teaching of the Nicolaitans, and that seems to be related to what practices? Yeah, idol worship, and idol worship, especially in the first century, always went hand in hand with yes. Yeah, sexual sin. Yeah, and the reference to Balaam and Balak actually plays that out. Because remember, Balaam wasn't able to curse the Israelites in the book of Numbers, and so his idea was to basically seduce them with idolatrous fornication, okay? And in the first century, fornication, immorality, prostitution was very much intertwined with the idol worship. That's one of the things that happened regularly at the idols' temples. And so you see idolatry and immorality hand in hand in the first century, and that's one of the ways that the Christians were tempted to compromise in this time period. Brian?
That is somewhat related to possibly the Gnostics as well, Gnosticism.
Yeah, that's always a little bit of a tricky thing to know when exactly Gnosticism became a thing, but yeah, Gnosticism for everybody else, that is a full-fledged philosophy taught that because the body and the soul are so separate, and the body is kind of, dirty and gross, and the soul is what's pure and eternal and sanctified and special, then basically it didn't matter what you did with your body, okay? And that is, among other things, you can use that philosophy to kind of justify sexual sin and say, well, it doesn't really matter what I do with my body because my soul is something separate that I'm keeping pure, so on and so forth. The strains of that are probably around at this time, and who knows, maybe for the churches that John is writing to, there's some of that philosophy that's being influenced, but we're not really told, and it's even hard to know from history, actually. Okay, yes, Terry.
Oh, the mic. Okay, the Epicureans and the Stoics came out of the whole idea of Gnosticism, special knowledge, and the way they approached the body versus the soul kind of thing. You have the Stoics, which thought that the body was completely evil, and then, of course, the Epicureans, if I understand it, their philosophy is completely different, that you could do anything that you could with the body because it's separate. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong on that one.
Well, thank you, Terry. And I won't be the one to correct you. I'm not knowledgeable enough on all of that. But all of that you said strikes me as familiar from what I've heard before. So persecution, compromise, and the third one, Terry, apathy. And I think that's fairly understandable. And Nathan suggested, and I would agree with him, that that's something that maybe we ourselves can relate to in our day and time, perhaps the easiest. And so the lukewarm church at the end, Laodicea, the church at Ephesus had left his first love, or even the dead church in Sardis. All of those are examples of an apathy. And it's I want us to see these are not just three separate things. These are three things that work together, right? And maybe number one especially influences the other two. Because when Christians are being pressured or persecuted for their beliefs, maybe the response is one of two things. You either change your beliefs, right? Change your teaching, change what you accept in order to fit in so that you're not persecuted, or you just kind of lose steam and give up, right? Because it's just too hard. The world's not going to persecute a compromised Christian, okay? Because the compromised Christian is just like them, so there's no reason to persecute. And the world's not going to persecute an apathetic Christian, right? Because they've already given up, and they don't have that zeal or that fervor anymore. So these are the dangers facing the churches. And I do want us to encourage us to keep these in our minds and keep the letters from chapters 2 and 3 in our minds. Don't separate those into some different compartment as we go through the vision from chapter 4 all the way to the end of the book. Chapters 2 and 3 should be at the forefront of our minds because that's the situation of the readers. So everything else is really addressing their situation. And so don't forget these three dangers as well as the content of the letters as we move forward. And I wanted to say something else kind of really related to that about the dangers of facing the Christians that receive the book of Revelation and the nature of the revelation as we talked about in our introductory class period, right? That the revelation, that word, the word is apocalypse. It means to reveal, right? To pull back the curtain. And I want us to see how important it was for these Christians in whatever situation they were in to have the curtain pulled back, to have their eyes opened, right? To see a different reality, to see the real reality, the true reality, right? For those Christians that are being persecuted, this book reveals why the trouble is taking place, okay? It's because there is this cosmic war playing out between good and evil, between God and Satan, and God's people are caught right in the middle of it. So it reveals why this struggle is taking place, and it reminds the persecuted Christians what the outcome will be, right? It reminds them that the ultimate and utter defeat of the nations and the world and the evil one is coming, and that God and his people will ultimately be victorious and reign forever. So just hold on, right? So you're persecuted now, but you see behind the curtain to see that you see the end of the story. So just hold on. But for the other groups, for the compromising or the apathetic, the revelation pulls back the curtain to wake them up, to show them that even though they may at the moment be living comfortable, affluent, nice lives, okay, enjoying themselves, they may be deceived by that now, but the reality is that they are in danger, that the reality is they're in bed with the great harlot of the world, as the imagery will play out later on in the book. And they're in danger of being swept away when Jesus comes. And again, Nathan pointed out, I think rightly, that the coming of Jesus, again in the book of Revelation, is not just that second coming, but anytime Jesus shows up to test or to bring a challenge or to judge a particular group of people, church or nation or whatever. Okay? So the revelation is pulling back the curtain for these very reasons, so that the Christians would either be comforted in their faithfulness or challenged in their compromise or apathy. Okay? All right, let's keep going here. And this is the structure, the basic structure that I gave you a few classes ago about the book of Revelation. And I wanted you really just to point out here that this top section that's supposed to be in blue at least, this really is the kind of introduction to the book. But there are multiple ways to introduce the book. Okay? So in chapter 1, we kind of had the intro of the vision of Jesus. Okay, and again, pulling back the curtain, keep with that same idea. John is in exile on the island of Patmos for testifying that Jesus is king. Again, Caesar is not really the ultimate king. Jesus is. That's what John was testifying to. That's what got him thrown into exile. But out of the blue, he hears a voice call to him and tell him to write this letter to the churches of Roman Asia. Churches, by the way, that John almost certainly had a relationship with before this book was written. Okay, but he turns to see that voice, and he sees the glorified King, right? He sees Jesus. Glorified, terrible, majestic, brilliant. He falls on his face as if he's dead, but Jesus picks him up and assures him that he's conquered, that he's alive forevermore, and that he is living and he is walking among his churches, among the lampstands. So chapter 1 is like the intro to the book because it's the vision of Jesus and everything else comes from Jesus' mouth. Then we had the letters, right, in chapters 2 and 3. And Jesus' message to those churches is that he reigns and that whoever will repent and stay pure from corruption and remain faithful to him through whatever trial will also conquer and reign as he reigns. I noticed, I actually don't think I had noticed it before. Maybe I had noticed it and I forgot it. But towards the end of every letter, the same phrase, "to him who conquers," is used over and over again in the letters, and all 7 letters to the churches. Okay? And there's other kind of reigning and victory sorts of language, right? So like in chapter 2, verse 10, the church in Smyrna is told, "Be faithful, I will give you a crown of life." We're so familiar with that phrase, crown of life, maybe we miss a crown symbolizes what? Kingship, authority, right? Or at the end of chapter 2, another example here, in verse 26, "The one who conquers, keeps my works until the end, I will give authority over the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron, as when earthen pots are broken in pieces, even as I myself receive authority from my Father." The reference to Psalm 2, and it's again a promise of ruling and reigning as kings. This is the promise given to the churches, the Christians, I should say, in these churches. And so coming into chapters 4 and 5, we might ask the question, well, how is that possible, right? If the reality of these Christians at the moment is they're, at best kind of a no-name, no reputation group of people in one of the provinces of Rome. At worst, they are a marginalized or persecuted or hunted down people, and they're poor, right? They don't fit into society economically. They have no status, right? They're ostracized, maybe even, again, imprisoned or killed. How could this group of people be talked about as conquerors and rulers, right? And those who will reign forever? You see the contrast there between the present situation and the promise, and how, again, Revelation is trying to get its readers to see the reality of things behind what is apparent at the moment. And chapters 4 and 5 are especially critical along those lines, because in chapters 4 and 5, we see how it can be possible that God's people can be conquerors and victorious. And really, chapters 4 and 5 show us the foundational vision from which everything else is going to come in the book of Revelation. And just to make it even more, to build this up even more, these may be two of the most important and powerful chapters in all the Bible. Okay, so let's read them. And I was going to have a discussion about this, but we'll maybe just fold this into our other discussion. There's two words that you're going to see in these chapters, and words that are going to be central to understanding the message of these chapters: holy and worthy. Holy and worthy. The text is going to say that God is holy, and the text is going to say multiple times that God and the Lamb are worthy. Be thinking about those words. And as we read all of this opening vision here in Revelation 4 and 5, as we've talked about before, hear the words that John is giving to us. Use your imagination to see this in your mind's eye, and maybe just hearing it without looking is easier for you to do that, to picture what's being described in your brain, and to reflect on the holiness of God and the worthiness of God and the Lamb. Let's read Revelation 4 and 5, and let's absorb it, soak it in together, and then we'll spend some time discussing it. Revelation chapter 4. After this I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And the first voice, which I had heard speaking to me like a trumpet, said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." And at once I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne stood in heaven, with one seated on the throne. And he who sat there had the appearance of jasper and carnelian. And around the throne was a rainbow that had the appearance of an emerald. Around the throne were 24 thrones, and seated on the thrones were 24 elders, clothed in white garments with golden crowns on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning, rumblings, and peals of thunder. And before the throne were burning 7 torches of fire, which are the 7 spirits of God. And before the throne there was, as it were, a sea of glass, like crystal. And around the throne, on each side of the throne, are 4 living creatures full of eyes in front and behind. The first creature is like a lion, the second living creature like an ox, the third living creature with the face of a man, and the fourth living creature like an eagle in flight. And the 4 living creatures, each of them with 6 wings, are full of eyes all around and within, and day and night they never cease to say, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." And whenever the living creatures gave glory and honor and thanks to him who is seated on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who is seated on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They cast their crowns before the throne, saying, "Worthy are you, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power. For you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created." Then I saw in the right hand of him who was seated on the throne a scroll, written within and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals?" And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look into it. And I began to weep loudly because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or to look into it. And one of the elders said to me, "Weep no more. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered, so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals." And between the throne and the 4 living creatures and among the elders I saw a lamb standing as though it had been slain, with 7 horns and with 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the world. And he went and took the scroll from the right hand of him who was seated on the throne. And when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. And they sang a new song, saying, "Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation, and you have made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they shall reign on the earth." Then I looked, and I heard around the throne and the living creatures and the elders the voice of many angels, numbering myriads of myriads and thousands of thousands, saying with a loud voice, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain, to receive power and wealth and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing." And I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and in the sea and all that is in them, saying, "To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be blessing and honor and glory and might forever and ever." And the 4 living creatures said, "Amen." And the elders fell down and worshiped. Okay, let's do like we used to do and spend some time discussing amongst ourselves. So I think most everybody's sitting near somebody. So take a few minutes to really just discuss what's on the screen here. How was that? Imagining what John described. What stood out to you? What did it make you feel? What did you see in your mind as you heard Revelation 4 and 5? And then maybe in particular, what strikes you as you reflect on the holiness of God, the worthiness of God and the Lamb? What does that mean? What do you think about that? Take maybe 3 minutes here to discuss amongst your groups, and then we'll continue that conversation by sharing out all together. Okay, let's take a few minutes and talk about this all together. What were y'all talking about? What stands out to you as you heard this scene, as you imagined it in your mind's eye? What do you want to say about Revelation 4 and 5? Brian, get us started here.
I'll begin with holy, 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 which the word holy means pure, 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 sinless, which is a critical verse because as you read in the 21st and 22nd chapters, nothing defiled or sinful enters into the presence of God, which takes you back to Isaiah 59:2. Our sins separate us from God. Therefore, we have to be sanctified in the blood of Christ in order to be made holy like he is holy. And so you see here the definition of eternal life and the definition of death, separation from God because he's holy and we are not, needing salvation of God.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Jordan?
Likewise with Brian, just thinking about the continuity piece. Isaiah came to mind. Leviticus talked about God being holy and his people being holy. And then Kimber made the point, too, that the eyes here is maybe a reflection of what Ezekiel saw and whatnot. So for me, I just think the holiness of God is all-encompassing. We saw it in the beginning in the Old Law that God's people were called to be holy. We saw it in the major and minor prophets. And then, obviously, at the end, holiness is not a one-time thing or for the Old Law or for the New Law. It was God's people is always holy because he is holy.
Thank you, Jordan. David?
You left with reading this? What impression are you left with reading this? An overwhelming sense of unworthiness. Almost like you've stumbled upon a room you're not supposed to be in. and you feel like you shouldn't be there. Like you're witnessing something happening where you don't belong almost. That's how I feel anyway.
Thank you, David. I heard murmurs that I'm taking as people agreeing with you. So, other thoughts? David used the word impression. I'll use the word as I used before, feeling. What did you feel as we read through this scene, or as you heard this scene described? Victory. Jordan says, what did you say, Harrison? Set apart. Awe. Magnificence. Celebration. Is that what you said? Power. So Paula says some of the creatures give you some fear, the way they are described. Okay, and what's kind of interesting about that? Because I agree. I mean, we talked about John falling on his face dead in chapter 1. Doesn't say he did that here, but I think I would if it was me. And what's kind of interesting about the fact that the creatures that are described would, if you saw them, strike you with such fear? Yes, yeah, the eyeballs and everything. Yeah. They're not normal. Okay. And as far as the vision goes, are they really the main event, we might say? Okay. So the creatures themselves that are so terrifying are like this, are just the secondary. They're the window dressing, so to speak, to the one who sits on the throne and the Lamb. Right. So if even the guys that are on the kind of the side of the vision are enough to terrify you and knock you dead, what does that say about the one that's at the center of the vision, right? The one that's sitting on the throne. Fearful, yeah. Fear, terrifying awe. Let's go. Rick, Albert, Fidencio.
I've got a note in mine that says in one of the manuscripts, it doesn't say holy, holy, holy. The manuscript reads that 9 times. Holy, 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 9 times. And the thought that comes to mind is, while this might appear to us to be over the top, there is no amount of worship or praise or adulation that we can give God that would match his actual holiness. And I think you've got one of the questions coming up is, how does that affect us in our worship? But just to put that mindset in place, we cannot do enough physically to give God enough praise for what he is deserving of.
Yeah. Interesting. And you may have heard this before, the 3, going even back to the vision of Isaiah that he sees where this construction is used, holy, holy, holy. In Hebrew, at least, the 3 is like the superlative, right? So it would basically, our way of be saying holiest, right? Holy, holy, or holiest. The 3 times. So 3 threes is, it's like superlative cubed or something. Albert?
In seeing this or in reading this, it's not hidden. John wept because he didn't know how are these going to be opened, but yet the 24 knew. And with the animals with the eyes, I just continue to remember God's message is not hidden. What he needs of us is not hidden. It's just it's for us to learn or to be taught. And again, it's not something so secretive that it's not hidden to just a select few. 24 is not a large number unless you're only 4. To me, it seemed like large numbers, lots of eyes. It's known what was going on. He was the only one that wasn't, but yet it was revealed, and others knew. And I just think that's the way God has always been. He's always revealed what he wants of us. It's just whether we have accepted it or not.
Thank you, Albert. Fidencio?
Just a quick reminder of what happened in Mount Sinai as well. It talks about God, like the thunder and everything, when Moses was going up in Mount Sinai to speak to God, and Israel was afraid because they fear for their life. And also what it says that any animal that steps foot on that heel must be stoned to death.
Yeah, the holiness, the power, the awe, the fear, all of that, the words we've said. In Sinai, we'll mention that again here in a second. Brian?
getting back to this term worthiness, obviously Jesus is worthy because he was sinless, he was pure, and for that reason he's worthy. But yet we know that he bore our sins. But yet in this reading, we understand that he's perfectly holy and pure. So the sins he bore, he no longer bears. And for the other sons of God, we don't bear those sins either. And so then you read down in 9 and 10 that he purchased us with his blood. And so you beginning to see, although it doesn't use the terms, worthiness bestowed upon the other sons of God. Therefore, like Jesus, we reign with him, sit on his throne, are kings, and reign forever.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, let's say a few things in kind of specific about chapter 4, and then we'll continue this discussion on Sunday and talk more specifically about chapter 5. But the way we read it and discussed it, I want to emphasize that we should be seeing this as a continuous vision. And that's going to be the case, by the way, after chapter 5. I'm going to always try to be reminding us to look back and see all of this kind of flowing together, even as we started this class, talking about chapter 4 and 5 flowing out of chapters 1, 2, and 3. But especially in 4 and 5, it's a unit here. And so there's a story that's playing out. There's a continuity of this vision in between these two chapters. But because the chapter breaks are there, we'll do 4 tonight and then continue into 5 on Sunday. Okay. Remember this phrase, maybe you don't, about apocalyptic literature, that apocalyptic writing like Revelation takes the person seeing it, and then the reader, by extension, to a transcendent reality, okay? And we talked about the kind of the transcendent reality, the transcendent space, right? That the person seeing the vision, they're taken into a transcendent space, and they're shown a view of time that is kind of outside time, where they're seeing kind of, ages of human history play out right before their eyes. And I think actually you get both of those here as Revelation 4 opens up. David actually mentioned in his comment about witnessing something you're not supposed to. And this phrase where John says, verse 1, behold, a door standing open. I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. The image that came to my mind is like you're walking through a school or a hall or something, and there's a door that's a little bit open. And you kind of hear something come out of the open door, and you kind of peek in, and you open the door a little bit farther, and it's like, what's going on here? It's just something weird or crazy or amazing, that's happening. And it's just, I just stumbled upon this open door. And that seems to kind of be what's happening here with John. There's a door open, okay? And the realities of heaven are, just right here at the pushing open of a door, and he can see it. This parallel dimension that has contact with John's dimension here. And he's able to look into it and get a glimpse into heaven itself. It's transcendent space that he is viewing here. It's God's space that he is invited into. And he is told to see what must take place after this, according to verse 1. I will show you what must take place after this. And I hope you kind of internalize some of the things we've said about what Revelation is not doing. It's not putting together a chronological timeline of events in history. Because you read that phrase and you might be tempted to think, okay, well, what must take place after this? So did chapters 2 and 3 kind of describe a set of events? And then now chapters 4 and 5 is going to describe like the next set of historical events that will take place in chronological order? And I don't think that's what it's saying. I think simply John is being, invited to see God's timeline. And that he's saying, as if he is saying to John, the current situation of yourself and of your readers. But let me show you a broader vision, okay, of where this is all headed and what I'm up to, okay? And where that starts is God's sovereign control, right? That's the focal point of this vision. God is on the throne. Yes, Caesar is ruling in Rome, and yes, he is forcing people, or at least local governors are forcing people to acknowledge that Caesar is the Son of God and that he is a God himself and that he is reigning, okay, and is all-powerful. But that's not the reality. The reality is that God is on the throne. God is sovereign. God is in control, okay? And this vision, I think, does pull together two aspects that would be familiar to the readers. One is the vision of God that is all throughout, or I should say, scattered throughout the Old Testament. Okay, so Fidencio actually mentioned the Mount Sinai, right? You could go through chapter 4 and you could highlight several different places where this is Sinai imagery, okay? The thunder and the lightning and the smoke, okay? This is like what happened when God came down and that dimension came in contact with Mount Sinai, okay? Jordan mentioned Isaiah chapter 6, where Isaiah has a very similar moment, okay? King Uzziah is dead, but Isaiah sees the Lord sitting on the throne, reigning still and reigning forever, and hears the holy, holy, holies, and sees the cherubim, right, around the throne of God. And so Ezekiel, was Ezekiel mentioned by name? But maybe y'all remember the 4 living creatures that are full of eyes, that have the same 4 animal characteristics, the ox, the lion, the eagle, and the man from Ezekiel chapter 1, okay? So what John is seeing here is right in line with the glimpses of God's glory that the Old Testament prophets received, and as I've already really said, the vision would, for the readers of Revelation, the first readers, it would have been very clear the implications of this message. Very clear the implication of saying God sits on the throne, He sits in His council, and He decides what happens, and He has all the power. Okay, and that the implication of that is Caesar is less than, and he is not God. And He is not the one calling the shots. He is not the one with the power. He is not the one with the authority. God is. Okay? And so this is the focal point of God on the throne, and all the amazing things that we're supposed to soak up and absorb about this description, the sights, the sounds, the smells, the feels about this really all center around God sitting on the throne. And in particular, I want to highlight this. Those heavenly subjects that Paula mentioned that are so terrifying in and of themselves, they recognize God's holiness. I'm going to give you a different definition of holy, a little bit different, and you can decide what definition you want to go with. But to me, or I would say that I think holiness really more so is about God being so set apart. He is unique, the uniqueness of God. He is, sometimes you say something is like singularly great, right? There's no way that you can compare anything else to it, right? It is in a category of its own. That's, I think, what holiness means as applied to God, that He is, and there is no other. That's a biblical phrase, right? That He is incomparable. Okay? There is no one else like Him. Again, you remember that language from the Bible. And, of course, His purity is just one of those characteristics, right? That He is pure beyond pure. And in a category all by itself, okay, in terms of His purity. But that's true of His power and His might and His goodness and His truthfulness and His faithfulness. Okay, He is in a category all by Himself. He is singular in His nature. He is, and there is no other. And He is holy, and He is holiest of holies. And so the subjects, the heavenly subjects here in this heavenly throne room, recognize His holiness, and they lay their crowns, again, remember, symbols of authority, at His feet. These are heavenly creatures that have authority. They have power. They have honor. They have glory. And yet, what do they say in the songs? All of that belongs to God. And so they lay it down at His feet. It's a recognition of, again, because you are worthy, in verse 11. Why? Because you created all things, and by your will they exist and were created. These heavenly creatures recognize God gave to me whatever power, whatever authority, whatever greatness I have, and so I'm laying it back down at His feet. And one of the reasons I emphasize that is because I want you to be looking throughout Revelation at the contrast to that, right? That instead the forces of the enemy, okay, they try to hold on to a power and authority for themselves. And there's even exchanges of authority between the beast or the evil one and the nations that he is using. Okay, so they receive their power, their authority from the beast, and they use their power and authority to make people serve the beast. But here we have these heavenly creatures doing what they ought to do, which is recognizing God's holiness and laying their authority and power down at His feet. So then let me just say this for the last 2 minutes we have, and if there is time and someone wants to throw something else in. You can do that. Revelation 4, these heavenly creatures, the 4 living creatures, 24 elders, okay, the praising of God. This is a scene in which everything and everyone is in heaven is offering praise constantly, day and night, never ceasing to praise him for his holiness and offering him everything they have. This is a picture of heaven, just completely unified in its giving of honor and praise to God. That's Revelation 4. But this is a story, and I want you, as you read Revelation 4 and 5 between now and Sunday, if you spend time in the text, I want you to notice the story that's playing out. There's a plot of the events in Revelation 4 and 5. And I won't give it all away here, although we've already read it, but Revelation 5 goes on to talk about the Lamb's role in the story. In particular, the role of the Lamb in the story is the redemption that God accomplishes through the Lamb and through the sacrifice of the Lamb. That's the story that's being told in a rather unique way in the beginning of chapter 5. And so then by the end of chapter 5, in Revelation 5 and verse 13, it says, and notice the difference here, all creatures in heaven, we already had that in chapter 4, but now it's all creatures in heaven and on earth and under the earth and in the sea and all that is in them join in this praise of the worthiness of the Lamb and the one that's sitting on the throne. The work of God in Jesus Christ, the redemptive work in Jesus Christ accomplishes this result such that all of creation joins in this theater of praise that we see in heaven currently. And all of creation will be unified in their praise of God and of the Lamb because of his holiness, because he is God and he is set apart, because of his worthiness, and because of the work of the Lamb. And so the question as you read Revelation 4 and 5 is, am I a part of that? Okay, this is why. This is what the text says. You have ransomed a people for God from every tribe, language, people, and nation. That's us. We have been redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. We have been ransomed so that we ourselves will join in this song of constant, never ceasing, day and night, praise and glory and honor in God, and laying down at his feet whatever blessing or glory or authority we have been given by him, we give it back to him. That's what Revelation 4 and 5 means to us, among other things, of course. And so we will pause there and pick up this conversation and Revelation chapter 5 on Sunday, that's supposed to say. Yeah, Brian.